Okay, I think we might actually make a start. So I'll quickly take the roll before we begin with today's presentation. So we have a presentation, I believe it's you, Georgina, Rhiannon and Emily. That's correct? Excellent. Hi. All right. So I'll quickly take the roll first and then we'll actually launch into today's presentation. Just before we do start though, are there any questions or queries with respect to anything to do with the unit, whether it be in terms of housekeeping issues or whether it be in terms of assessments or any other questions that people have? Now's a good
Yeah, hello.
Yes, Keith.
I have no idea I have no idea who's in my group at the moment. I'm trying to get a hold of them, but I don't know who to get a hold of.
Okay, sorry, Keith, I missed the first little bit of that. Would you mind repeating what your question was?
Yeah, I don't know who's in my group for the assignment.
Okay, all right. Well, can you hang back just after today's presentation and maybe I can actually give you some clarity as to who you're working with? What week are you actually presenting in?
Week 10, I think.
Week 10. Okay, not to worry. All right.
Liz,
yes,
can we submit our group presentation? Is that all right if that's by PDF?
Yes, it's fine.
Okay, cool.
So as long as it's the one file.
Yeah, and I've merged all the PDFs together, but that was the only way I could figure it out. That was relatively easy.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
File all combined together with the list of requirements as per the learning guides, the discussion questions, your notes, your slides, and your reference list. Okay, all right, I'll take the roll. Zuka, Georgina?
Yes.
Mark?
Yep, here.
Thank you, Mark. Abby?
Yeah.
Thanks, Abby. Jake? Nadine? Stephanie?
Yeah.
Thanks, Stephanie. Rhiannon?
Yep.
Keats? Yep. Emily? Yep.
Yep.
Joshua, I noted. Thank you, Joshua.
Yeah,
Matthew?
I'm here.
Yep. Matthew, just come online when you're ready, please.
Yeah, I'm just driving, so I'll be here in 10 minutes.
That's all right. All good. Thank you. Therese? Mona? Welcome.
Yeah.
Thank you. Jeanette?
Yep, I'm here.
Thank you, Janet. Christian? Aidan?
Yep, I'm here.
And Karen. Welcome, Karen. Okay. All right. So whenever you ladies are ready, please feel free to commence.
All right. And
So are we screen sharing?
sorry, just bear with me 1 second.
That's all right. All good.
Did I?
We have to minimize the. Yeah. Okay.
Go away.
No, fine.
All right. So I'll just first of all introduce myself. I'm Georgina.
I'm Rhiannon.
I'm Emily. And today our case study is based on professional responsibility and confidentiality.
No, it's intro first.
Oh, okay. Sorry. All right. So, like I said, it covers professional responsibility and confidentiality. Confidentiality is essentially a fundamental aspect of professional conduct and ethical practice. And also it covers duty of care, which is that the worker has the legal and moral responsibility to keep clients safe from harm. So during this presentation, we will be looking at the legal and ethical considerations that are examined and explored through various examples. So like I said before, responsibility of doctors specifically have to ensure that the relationships with the patients work cohesively. So in other words, ensuring trust and compliance from both ends. Then the confidentiality, under certain circumstances, can be disclosed. These can be whether the patient gives consent, legal authority to do so, and obviously in the interest of the greater public. So here we also have a YouTube video that kind of outlines the confidentiality do's, don'ts, ethical dilemmas, and the exceptions.
Confidentiality is a key component of the patient-physician relationship. Patients who believe that their health information will remain confidential are more likely to provide doctors with more accurate information, which in turn will lead to better medical advice. Here are 3 things you cannot forget about confidentiality. 1. Most breaches are inadvertent. You may encounter a particularly challenging case that you want to share with your colleagues. That is okay, as long as you don't disclose information that can reasonably lead to the identity of the patient, like name, initials, prominent family members, or occupation, if unusual. You should also refrain from sharing cases on social media, especially those who might be on the news, as you can easily lose control of who sees this information once posted. 2. Confidentiality applies to individuals, not families. It is not uncommon for physicians to care for multiple family members. This can be very rewarding, but also fraught with ethical dilemmas. What if your patient asked you why you prescribed birth control pills to her 15-year-old daughter? Or what if you received a request from an insurance company for your patient's family history after you recently diagnosed his father with coronary artery disease? With few exceptions, you can only disclose medical information with your patient's implied or express consent, and the information disclosed should have been collected directly from that patient. 3. There are exceptions to confidentiality. The law recognizes specific situations where you need to disclose information for the greater public good. An example of mandatory reporting is when you suspect that a child is in need of protection. There are also situations where it is permissible for a physician to report to a governmental agency. For instance, in the situation in which a patient demonstrates to you that he or she will likely inflict serious harm on a specific person or group of persons.
All right, now I'll pass you on to Emily just to discuss the first case.
Okay, so the first case is a husband and wife work within the same health centre. The husband works as a naturopath and the wife is an acupuncturist. During the week, the wife has a client who is upset about her nephew being expelled from school. Later that week, the husband also has another client that is upset. The husband explains to the client that he understands that she would be upset about her son being expelled from school. The client is outraged and is not actually upset about her son and assumes that her sister is the one who disclosed the information. Soon after, the husband's client and the wife's client cease their therapy in that health centre. So we have a few questions about it.
Yep, so go soapbox.
So there's a Go Soapbox link in the chat. I can also read out the code if anyone would like that. It's 584-732-445. So there's just the first question, and that is about who is at fault. Who you believe breached confidentiality with their client.
Is that working for everyone? Is anybody having difficulties?
Let's get the code again.
It is 584-732-445. So majority of people chose the wife as the person who breached confidentiality, and that also aligns with the Australian Medical Association, which showed that the wife should not have disclosed information regarding her patient's personal life to her husband, and it compromises the trust between the patient and the health professional. A few other people chose both, which is also true. According to the Australian Naturopathic Practitioners Association Code of Ethics, the husband breached the patient's confidentiality as he disclosed information about another patient without consent. So we have another. Is there anyone want to explain their reasoning for choosing the option that they chose? Okay, we'll move on to the next question. It's just to discuss. Is there a conflict of interest working within the same health clinic and discussing clients outside of the workplace?
Yes, I think there is.
Why do you think that?
Because they both have different clients, and the client isn't speaking to both of them. The client is speaking to whoever the therapist is. And an example of that is what you just said, that case study that where confidentiality was breached in two directions. So
Yeah, exactly.
Thanks, Karen.
Thank you. Anyone else want to add to that?
About this idea that information actually be on a fax machine sent from one agency to another and go through the hands of an admin assistant or receptionist before it gets to the professional. So not quite the same thing as a personal relationship like a husband and a wife discussing clients outside the workplace, but within a workplace, different people seeing information that may not be in direct contact or client service.
I think that still should be upheld. I think as part of their contract for any agency like that, you have to abide by the rules in which you don't, any information you may come across, you don't disclose to other people unless it's specified that you can talk about it in the workplace for work reasons and not for personal purposes.
Okay. Keep that question in mind because I think there'll be some opportunity to discuss that further throughout your case study.
Definitely. Thanks, Liz.
Thanks. Okay, question 3. Should health care workers be able to discuss their day at home in relation to their clients? So should they be able to discuss their day as a whole and their clients at home?
I mean, they could be able to say what they did. They can't have names. They can't really single anyone out.
Yeah. So without identifying them in any way.
Can't really say who it is. It's really it's about privacy as well. So
definitely.
Say I did this, I did that, but you can't say I helped this particular lady do this, I helped do this and whatever. So you can't really single them out or breach their privacy.
And I guess that point, Keith, just to confirm and reiterate, was made clear in the video that you actually showed about identifying or providing detail, rather, that would then identify who you might be talking about. So if you say, I saw somebody today at 10 o'clock this morning, if somebody was keen to know and get your diary and have a look at who you saw, they'd be able to identify, in fact, who you're speaking about. So disclosure of information in a general way that doesn't provide the detail that would make a person who might be interested identify who you're actually speaking about is permissible. But once you provide the detail that would make them traceable, you're actually in breach of your confidentiality obligations.
Yeah, thank you, Liz.
Okay, so we have another question on Go Soapbox, which is able for you guys to answer. It is, what ethical theories support and what ethical theories oppose the action in this scenario as being ethical? So what could make you think that these actions were ethical or unethical? We'll just wait for a couple more responses and then move on. Okay, so majority of people chose the virtue theory.
Okay.
Yep. Yeah, it's still going. How or why did the woman disclose this information to her husband? Was she stressed about her day at work, or was she simply gossiping about her patient? The motivations for doing this is unknown, so the virtue theory is hard to access. Raw deontology, not that anyone answered that, suggests that the woman's actions were unethical, as health professionals should not disclose any information about their patients to other health professionals without dire consent, or consent isn't given. So it depends on the circumstance. Now I'll pass on to...
Do you want to ask them a question? So why do you all think that virtue theory is supporting the husband? So that was the overall consensus for the Go Soapbox. Why does everyone think that the husband was ethical under the virtue theory?
I think because he was just concerned for her. His intention was just to, discuss why she was upset and make her feel better.
Yeah, definitely. So the husband was just trying to look after his patient, and he might have inadvertently not assessed the situation properly, but at the end of the day, in that moment, he was just trying to help the patient. So cool. Thank you, Stephanie.
Right.
So they're just the answers which supported that the wife should not have disclosed, neither should the husband, and they breached confidentiality. The scenario in Article 1 showed that health professionals had no reason to breach confidentiality as the information wasn't legally required, or the patients weren't at risk of any harm. Now I'll pass on to Rhiannon for Article number 2.
Okay, so Georgina will be focusing on explaining Article 2. It questions, can and should health professionals disclose information in a range of different contexts? So I'll be discussing the first part of the article, which discusses the idea of the Defence Force. So it starts off where an Australian Defence Force doctor was found in court for writing inaccurate reports, improperly referring a senior officer to a psychiatrist without their consent, and also and they have in absence of any symptoms. And finally, they disclose the patient's condition to her commanding officer. So keep in mind that even in the armed forces, the doctors still have a duty of confidentiality to their patients, and all patients are entitled to medical privacy. In the article, Lord Denning is cited as followed. There are some things which may be required to disclose in the public interest, in which event no confidence can be prayed in aid to keep them secret. So keep that in mind. So the author of the article then goes on to reflect their own experiences as an army doctor. The author goes on to explain that he came across an obviously mentally ill volunteer conscript who who joined to learn skills necessary to deal with those conspiring against him at home, and allegedly spoke of planning to roll a grenade into the sergeant's tent. The signs of schizophrenia couldn't be more obvious, so the patient was escorted to undergo specialist psychiatric assessment after the author contacted the patient's commanding officer and senior medical officer. By recommending the patient, by law, they can formally be assessed without consent by a psychiatric superintendent, who in this case agreed with the author's diagnosis of schizophrenia. We ought to keep in mind that the key to psychiatric certification is that the breach in confidentiality is sanctioned by law only when made to the appropriate authority. So now I'm going to pass you on to Georgia, who's going to explain some other contexts for this article.
So the second case in this article was to do with HIV. So it's also got an ethical and a legal dilemma that holds risk to others in the case of an infectious disease, so HIV. So it describes an incident involving a woman and her fiancé, who's of African background, have gone to seek medical testing for HIV and other sexual transmitted diseases before deciding to commence in a sexual relationship. During consultation with the doctor failed to carry out any pre-test counselling, nor did he gain consent for each partner to share results when results happened to come out. So eventually it turned out that the woman tested negative, however the man tested positive for HIV. The doctor then contacted both of the patients, and the woman was told that she tested negative, and the man told test positive. The man was asked to go seek medical advice and attend a HIV clinic, and the woman, when she found out she was negative, asked the doctor, what was my partner's test results? But the doctor wasn't able to give that details, so the doctor asked the woman to ask her partner herself. So the doctor, or the man, ended up changing his results, forging his results to appear negative, and consequently the woman found this out, but this was post engaging in sexual activity. Therefore she contracted the infection and followed on to take civil action against the doctor for this incompetence in his work role. So the doctor did not correctly advise the couple on the consequences, nor did he take further actions to report the case. So, question, we kind of combined the two cases as we sort of saw relevance in both of them. So first of all, who is responsible to ensure that health professionals are aware of the correct protocols in general or in specific settings? So in other words, who should be responsible in knowing the confidentiality protocols? Does anybody want to answer that? Try to answer that?
I'm going to say that it's the AMA, the body that administers the certification of doctors and psychiatrists. So they should make sure that their practitioners are aware of the correct protocols.
Yes, so pretty much, yeah, you're right. So governance, managers, just anyone that has responsibility in hiring, and even the person who, the individual themselves should know any protocols around their professional setting.
Yeah, so there are different levels of responsibility there, isn't there? So there's levels at the professional level in terms of associations. There's responsibility at the professional level in terms of associations. There's responsibility at the organisational level in terms of the employer's responsibilities. And included within that, the individual has some individual responsibility to make sure that they comply with and that they're aware of what their obligations are. So it's a systemic responsibility that applies across a number of different areas. Yeah.
Yeah, I think something also that should be said is that, as Liz said, the health professional to an extent has their own responsibility, but if in any case they're not sure, that they should still seek legal advice if they ever come across any dilemma of what to do or what not to do. So we've got to keep that in mind as well.
Yeah.
Okay.
Right, so question 2. When do we draw the line between duty of confidentiality and the duty to prevent foreseeable harm to others? So when does that actually become a problem? We have a Go Soapbox for this as well, and specifically the question is, do we have this one? Yeah. Yes, should the doctor have informed the woman of her fiance's HIV positive result? Should he have done that? Does the ethical scenario of her contracting the infection outweigh the protocols that he should carry out for confidentiality?
I think any woman who was in that position would think that as long as somebody told her, I think that's an ethical requirement of the situation. I'm not sure what the law is regarding that, but I think from an ethical point of view, she needed to be told for sure.
Okay. So do you want to?
So there are legal obligations. So if the doctor was to consult with an approved specialist medical practitioner, which he failed to do so, he would have been able to gain that access for a court order to actually breach confidentiality to tell the woman that her fiancé was indeed positive. So yeah, there are legal ways around that.
Which is still problematic because of the timeline probably, but
yeah, definitely. Yeah. I think something also that you need to consider is that the doctor's responsibility isn't as such to tell the woman themselves, as you've said, Karen, but it's simply just to protect the woman. And in any scenario, it's not necessarily about breaching confidentiality, but it's just protecting them. So even if in some case means incarcerating the person so they don't affect others, then if that's necessary in that situation, then that's still satisfying and satisfying the needs of the public. So yeah.
So the results from the Go.
Sorry, ladies, I just interrupt you for a moment. I think Keith has his hand up. So is that right, Keith, or are you stretching?
I was just gonna say that when something as serious as like HIV or any STD or something really serious, I think you could actually make an exception as far as confidentiality goes. Like I think doctors should have told her that their results in case. I guess then again, he didn't know that the guy was gonna forge the results, make him appear negative. So it's kind of he was doing what his practitioner was like probably told him to do, and then he didn't know that what he failed to say would end up in the ass like this. So it's like
he's relying on the client to do what's right.
Yeah, he's kind of relying on like the guy to be honest and like that, but he failed to do so, and then something hurting him because he didn't tell the person. So it's like he didn't know that. So I don't know how he can be like responsible.
Well, in the case study, it actually says that as a doctor, your responsibility was to report that. To make sure that you advise that the man, if he doesn't prove that he's told his fiancée and she's aware, and that everything is
compliant.
Yeah, everything is compliant, and that he goes for HIV, and that he can show that and prove that. If he doesn't, the doctor actually has responsibility to report him, the man, to an authority, which then has which can legally sanction the breach of confidentiality in which the woman could be then informed in that scenario.
Right.
And that's the issue that I think, Rhiannon, you sort of hit the nail on the head when you said that the doctor's responsibility was not necessarily to disclose the information, but to take proactive measures to protect the woman's health. And he didn't do that in the sense that there was no follow-up or no checking of what had actually happened. I mean, implicit in there as well, the fact that they actually attended the clinic together would indicate some level of agreement that the information be shared. But that's a little bit iffy. I mean, you could probably argue, well, you haven't got express permission, so disclosing the information directly might well be a breach of confidentiality. But certainly under the Public Health Act, the doctor has responsibilities to notify the Department of Health of an infectious disease and to ensure that there's compliance in terms of attendance with and engagement with the services, so as to ensure that the overall protection of the community and the public is actually being safeguarded. And that didn't happen, neither with the partner or more generally. So that's in fact what the doctor's breach was in this particular instance.
Yeah.
So taking those actions without the disclosure would have been what was necessary in this particular situation. But the doctor did neither disclose nor took the protective measures himself to make sure that there was no risk of harm to others.
Yeah, and that's outlined by our textbook, Kerridge, Lowe and Stewart. They kind of look at the consequentialist terms of the degree of overall impact on the public in general.
Mm-hmm.
But there's kind of a difficult, where do you draw the line, as in ethically and legally, when we're trying to limit infectious disease from spreading. You still need to gain trust and cooperation from the clients. They still need to feel like going to the doctor and testing positive. They can still do that without having the everybody knowing, like the stigma that is involved around HIV. Do you understand?
Yeah.
That makes sense, and that sort of draws back to the point that I was making about whether the receptionist and the admin person would see the information, whether that was a breach of disclosures of information, even though the correlation might not be completely obvious at first glance. But the disclosure of information is permissible on an as-needs-to-know basis. So if you can answer the question as to why the information needs to be known by the person that you're disclosing it to, that's quite defensible.
Yeah.
So if you can justify why the admin assistant is privy to this information, knowing obviously that admin assistant would have requirements to keep that information private and confidential themselves once that they're privy to that information. But if you can justify why they can see it and why they need to see it, then it's permissible. So it's to prevent unauthorised access by anybody within a particular organisation or even the community at large as to the disclosure of information that isn't relevant to what they need to do. Does that make sense?
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
So in the results of the GOSO-PROX, it's actually reflective of how it is hard to draw that line for certain cases. The results were 50-50. Half of the people said that you would tell the woman, and the other half said you wouldn't. But I'm sure it depends on circumstances. All right, Rhiannon.
Okay, so
the ethical.
Okay.
Did you want to go with this one?
Yeah, I can do that.
Sorry.
Sorry. So you want me to do that? Yep. So another question is, how did the doctor's decision in doing what he's done impact the duty of care he had for the woman? So what he's done, how has that impacted her? It's obviously impacted her negatively. Has he been negligent at all in doing that?
I think he has. I think that he fought simply for the fact that he didn't do anything proactively to prevent her getting a disease, that he was fully aware of her relationship with her partner was a sexual relationship, and there was a pretty high likelihood that they were going to have sexual relations, and and subsequently she is at very high risk of contracting HIV.
Yeah, definitely. So we found that NSAR 1988 basically said that if a doctor has a patient, especially, even more so, if they have two patients and one is contracted HIV and the other is known as a sexual partner or a potential sexual partner, that the doctor has a duty of care and a responsibility to not only protect the confidentiality of the HIV positive person, but also other people that may be infected. And I think that's really important in that sometimes the greater good of many is more important than the breach of the confidentiality of one person. In some cases, assuming it also is to the correct authority when I say it is. So yeah, I think that's definitely something we need to consider. So we've got another Go Soapbox question regarding the ethical theories. So if everyone could have a look at that, the question is, does rule, ontology and consequentialism justify the acts of the health professionals in Article 2?
Just to go in there, no, we don't have that last one on Go Soapbox, so we're just going to discuss it.
Okay, sorry about that, guys. So rule, ontology and consequentialism, would you say that justifies the acts of all the health professionals we've talked about in Article 2 so far?
So just repeat your question, Rhiannon. You're asking whether rule, deontology.
Yep, and consequentialism. Do those two ethical theories, do they justify the acts of the health professionals as ethical? Is what they did ethical in Article 2, or do they under those principles, are what they did unethical? So that's what I'm trying to ask, is under either or both of those theories, is it ethical or is it unethical?
I'm going to say it was unethical for consequentialism because the outcome was that the woman became ill and it had certainly shortened her life. And so the consequences of those actions were unethical. Rule deontology is probably going to be ethical because he has maintained confidentiality, he has done the right things within that and not contacted her and followed up. So on that regard, I think it is correct, but for the consequentialism, no.
Well, I think that's interesting, Jen. I definitely agree with the consequentialism, but now that you've said that, I've even originally thought rule deontology in a different manner. So I was thinking rule deontology that from the start, that from the very start of it, that he wasn't correctly providing his duty, like upholding his duty, because the consent wasn't given at the start. So when the couple didn't go through any counselling regarding the potential circumstances or results, and then he didn't say, okay, so when we do get the results, are you all right if your partner knows about your result and your partner there? So I'm thinking it on that tack, and in that way I'd say that by duty that it's unethical, but further down the track, as you said, Jeanette, it does say that, well, he's upholding his duty for what he's done at that point. So I think that's very interesting.
Certainly the whole case should have been handled with a lot more anticipation of what was going to happen and managing that whole dynamics, and it didn't happen, so it's outcome for everybody.
I think more than anything is that a doctor or any health professional, they need to conduct themselves in a correct manner and anticipate the worst and prepare for that and make sure that everything's set up to deal with that. Okay, so that is lovely. So I'm going to move on to the last little bit. Oh, sorry. I've just ignored the answers, which is very helpful. So I just wanted to make sure that in any scenario, be it the fact in the defence article that the doctor disclosed information to the commanding officer, or anything like that, that where appropriate, that patients need to be aware of information that may be shared with others. So even if the consent isn't given, if for any chance that that needs to be breached, let the patient know and then be aware. And as I've said before, if ever in doubt as a health professional, make sure you consult legal aid. And regarding specifically to the HIV, reasonable steps must be taken to prevent any identifiable third party. So in the case of the woman in Article 2B, if they're at harm, we have to protect them. And so, Dr. Space. Yeah, so it's just acknowledging that in the HIV article that because the doctor didn't protect the woman, he is liable for civil action because he knowingly failed to prevent harm. And also, duty of care is a really important theme, and the doctor owes all patients and any sexual partners that the doctor may know of, the doctor also has responsibility to them to protect them. Okay.
Can I raise a question?
What was that? Sorry, Josh?
Can I just raise a quick question?
Yeah, no, sure.
So in regards to the HIV case, would informing the partner put the actual fellow with the HIV in danger himself?
So what was that? So could you please repeat that? Sorry.
So I just want to play devil's advocate a little bit. So with the fellow with the HIV, by informing the partner, does that in fact put him in potential harm himself?
Yeah, well, that's actually quite interesting. I've actually read some articles about basically when is it necessary to disclose someone has HIV, and research Georgina's done said basically that it only needs to be disclosed if there's sexual partners. What was the other? Do you remember the other one? The two. It only needs to be disclosed. Don't know.
Only two reasons: if they're going to have sexual intercourse with someone and if they're going to donate blood.
Donate blood, yeah. So those are the only two reasons. And also, I've even read, like, if someone's known to be HIV, well, how someone's going to react to that? Are they going to be put on social media? I've read things about people with HIV have death threats. So I think that's definitely something to consider, because it's, as Liz said, it's on a need-to-know basis. If it's a known sexual partner, then that could be explained as a necessary reason. But as far as everyone else, unless it's the reasons we've already discussed, it's not necessary for them to know. But disclosing the HIV positive does have its risks to that person.
Yeah, maybe I can pipe in with this. So it was the expectation from a legal perspective that anybody who was or had a communicable disease, particularly HIV, had the risk of disclosure to sexual partners, or had the obligation, I should say, of disclosure to sexual partners. But in fact, the legislation was amended only late last year, and it moved from mandatory disclosure to mandatory protection. So as long as the person who actually has HIV takes precautionary measures during sexual intercourse so as not to actually transmit the infection to their sexual partner, they have met their legal obligations, which is quite interesting. So it's very similar to what we were talking about with the doctor. They don't necessarily need to disclose, but they need to actually take preventative measures so as not to infect the person, their partner. Yeah. It's only a recent amendment to the legislation, in fact. So I guess, I mean, I don't know. Do you think that goes far enough? Do you think there should be a risk of disclosure, or do you think that protection is enough? Not risk of disclosure. Do you think that there should be an obligation of disclosure, or do you think that taking preventative measures should be enough? I mean, I'd be interested to hear your thoughts about that.
I think it depends on how compliant the individual is going to be. Depending on what protection measures they are willing to carry out.
I think at the end of the day, the protection that is in that protects both parties in a more general basis. So make sure that the harm it doesn't come to other people, but at the same time that the minimal disclosure, as Josh was trying to get at, from what I've taken, is what about the person that has the disease? In the case of an infectious disease, it does protect them. But then the disclosure, in any case, does the person who's at risk, do they have the right to know? And I think with the disclosure, I think that's more in the interest of the person at risk than what it is the person who is risking other people. So I think that's kind of whose best interests are you trying to look at and who you're trying to protect.
Yeah, and it is very much, as you mentioned earlier in your presentation, based on this idea of utility. You know, what's the greatest good for the greatest number of people, and looking at it from that public health umbrella, particularly when you're talking about obviously communicable diseases, that the law toggles there and actually tries to juggle individual rights with community responsibilities. And that's why we do have exceptions. And similarly with vulnerable people such as children, we have the mandatory reporting requirements to actually ensure that those that are most vulnerable within the society, there is state intervention to look at protecting irrespective of the individual rights for privacy of the family or the parents who might be involved. And that goes between agencies as well. So Section 16A of the Care and Protection Act for Children was amended some 6 years ago to allow for the free exchange of information between organisations when it comes to the identification of risk of harm to children. And that came about as a result of, I'm not sure if any of you remember the Duffy case in Melbourne, where it was a separated family. They were out travelling to, I think it was spending time with Dad on a particular Saturday. Dad was on the verge of a breakdown. He stopped the car on Westgate Bridge. He actually got his daughter Darcy, who was, I believe, only fairly young at the time, got her out of the car. She was actually in the middle of her two brothers who were sitting on the window seats of the back of the vehicle, picked her up, went to the edge of the Westgate Bridge and actually dropped her in. And it came about as a result of that investigation that the professionals who were involved with this family knew that Dad was actually on the verge, that he was losing it. But everybody knew a little bit of information, but they weren't sharing or exchanging what they knew with each other. So how critical it was in terms of Dad's mental health stability, nobody really had a full picture of, because everybody knew a little bit of information, but nobody was actually sharing what they knew with each other. And so Section 16A was an initiative or amended to allow that free exchange so that professionals didn't feel, oh my gosh, I can't say it's a breach of privacy, but in good faith, if they are concerned about the risk of harm, particularly to vulnerable people, it's quite permissible to actually exchange that information.
Definitely. Okay, thank you, Liz, for that. That is all quite interesting. So I'm going to move on to the last part of Article 2. So it's kind of split up in, well, it's not even split up, it's just a lot of different scenarios regarding the concept of should we tell and can we tell as health professionals. So in other circumstances, the duties imposed on health professionals is balanced by law in such a way that it provides them statutory immunity. So as talked about in the video at the start, when reporting to the relevant authorities that a patient is unfit to hold a driver's license, legal actions cannot be pursued, like civil actions can't be pursued for the doctor reporting that. So this is an example of a situation that's easily measurable through something such as poor vision. So that's pretty straight cut. Whereas on the other hand, when, assuming it's reported to the correct authority, we have to keep that in mind, when reporting cases such as child abuse, suspicion is all that's needed for statutory immunity to be granted to the health professional. So the suspicion protects the health professionals who simply report in good faith and without malice, because sometimes if you wait until all the facts are there, it might be too little too late. Also, in New Zealand, a doctor was sued for reporting a patient's mental condition to the wrong authority. So the doctor disclosed the information of the patient to her husband's solicitors, who then used this information against her in the divorce proceedings. So if the doctor simply recommended the patient for certification, if he was worried about a mental condition, he would have had immunity to civil action, but unfortunately he reported it to the wrong authority. So that's wrapping up all the content for the article. So does anyone have any thoughts or anything before I ask this question of why do you think doctors in some cases don't follow the protocols of confidentiality? So if you guys remember watching the video at the start, in most cases, doctors inadvertently don't follow protocol. So it's not necessarily that they're doing it on purpose, but it's just, we have to remember that the human condition applies to us all, including health professionals. Everybody makes mistakes, even doctors, and it could be for a range of reasons. So does anyone have any further thoughts on this idea? Okay, so we are running short for time. To wrap up, I'm going to ask the question, from your own personal experiences, has your confidentiality ever been breached by a health professional, or has the health professional ever fulfilled their duty of care to you? Does anyone have any thoughts of that? So if anyone wants to pop in, please do. But food for thought that I've been thinking about. I've been attending the same health practice for about 10 years, and for many years I would see any health professional available. I didn't have a specific doctor. I would simply just go in, get what I needed done. So I've noticed that all the doctors could view my notes on my medical record that other doctors have added. So essentially the doctors are sharing notes about my health. I personally don't have a problem with this, but it's just got me thinking with this context, with the context of the topic. By simply electing to see a different doctor at the same health practice, are we implying consent that the current doctor or health professional can view all the notes added to your record? I think that's a grey area. Does anyone have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think it almost fits into like a multidisciplinary team when you have a condition and it's discussed by a panel. So they've all got access to your records. They know your story. You haven't necessarily given direct consent for your records to be discussed, but it does happen.
Yeah, I just think it's quite interesting because I have no problem with this. But at the end of the day, it's implied consent that we're giving, and I wasn't even aware that I was giving it. And keep in mind, according to the Australian Medical Association, where appropriate, the patient should still be informed of what's going on, and I think that's something that might be overlooked in some cases. Okay, so just wrapping up, guys. I have a video, but I won't show it to you because we're running short for time. But should we be worried that Should we be worried that our health records are accessed online now? What about the eHealth system? So the eHealth system was introduced in 2016 and is a 10-year program to basically enable patient-focused and easily digitally accessible healthcare. But can we trust that our privacy and confidentiality won't be breached?
There's also a Go Soapbox question on this, just to see where people's minds are at.
Yeah, so I've done some research. Like, it's not the first time that the government's had a breach of confidentiality and someone's hacked into their system. If our medical records are going up onto the system, can we trust them? The government even admits that they're seeing a growing sophistication in attacks. So if they're putting all our medical information, our personal information online, can that still be upheld? Can they guarantee that?
You raised some interesting questions, given particularly our census experience. Was it last year where everyone got on and the whole thing crashed within the matter of a few minutes? So certainly the technology is meant to make it easier in terms of centralising the records and having it available, but it doesn't always work out that way, and it is open to so you raised some interesting questions there.
Yeah.
So the results.
So the results say that 57% of people said no, that we can't trust that our privacy won't be breached, and 43% said yes. So I think that's quite interesting. And I know we're running out of time, but I think it's just something interesting to think about. That with something like this, without even not even considering the health professionals, but in a general sense, can we trust it? In general, can our confidentiality be upheld and ensure that other countries, other people?
I think the element of trust is a question, but also too, like all of our records that are online, how much of an element of trust is there? And I think to a degree, we have to be confident that the checks and balances are there, or else if we don't have faith, we do need to have that confidence and that our information will be protected. This is an issue that is very much in the mind of some community groups. How do we know that we are going to be protected? And it's a question that is often raised within the health record system, and that's one of the primary concerns that some community groups do have, and they are lobbying the government to make sure that all elements are going to be looked after.
Yeah.
The health system has nowhere near the sophistication yet that people think that it has, and it's going to take a long time and a lot of money.
Yeah, so from the research I've done, there was a report by New South Wales Health and the Australian Cyber sector, and they basically say that everything's all right, and they've got a health security operations centre which is specified to protect, detect and respond to threats to any data centres or network systems or applications, and that there are security measures. But it still comes down to, as like you were saying, Jeanette, there's lots of people who are going to be worried about this. And to wrap up, unless anyone else has any other comments or thoughts. Okay, sorry to take so long, guys, but to wrap up, I believe that professional responsibility of health professionals to uphold confidentiality to all their patients will be an ongoing point of interest through time. But moving into a new technological era, we must also carefully consider if our confidentiality is being upheld by the online databases which store the information. I think that's something just ties well in with the topic just to think about for the future and where we're going in the healthcare industry. Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, guys. All right, so that does bring our tutorial to a close today. Keeds, if you perhaps can hang back just for a few moments so I can provide you with some information, that would be really helpful. Does anyone have some general questions just before I do let you go? So don't forget, please, that your online create tasks continue for this week, as do the online quizzes. So the same requirements there by 5 p.m. on Friday. Does anyone have any questions before I do let you go?
Liz, just out of curiosity, I know some weeks there's reflect. There's the create, think, reflect. I've been currently doing the reflect ones that say put it in your journal article. I've just realised if it says reflect and it doesn't mention the journal article, do we still need to upload that to the Learning Journal?
No, you don't. The reflect questions are to help you think about the main issues or concepts or ideas around the particular topic, just to sort of complement your learning and your engagement with it.
Yeah, okay, cool, thanks. I was just not sure because I just realised that this week it specifically said Learning Journal. I'm like, okay, that's fine. But I'm like, there's been other reflect questions that I haven't physically written anything. I've just, as you said, thought about it for food for thought. But yes, thank you, Liz.
You only need to submit it if it says to do so. Otherwise, it's just to think about the content.
Yeah, thanks, Liz.
All right, thanks, guys. Thank you very much. I'll let you go. And Keys, I'll just ask you to hang back for a few moments.